continent of Africa is home to immense diversity, home to over 1.4 billion people speaking more than 2,000 languages and embracing countless traditions that shape its identity. Yet despite this rich cultural tapestry, regional unity often remains elusive on the African continent. Could it be that the very thing that sets Africa apart, its cultural diversity, is also the key to bringing the continents together? Today on Talking Points, we shall be exploring how African nations can harness their cultural heritage not as a source of division, but as a powerful force for regional integration. Can share tradition, languages and histories be the glue that binds Africa's regions together? And what lessons can we learn from the past and present efforts to unite the African continent through culture? We shall be unpacking this with our guest this day. This is Talking Points. Stay with us. Hello, dear audience of For You Media Africa. It's always a pleasure to be in your company. And like we mentioned in our preamble, today we're discussing the intersection between a culture and unity on the African continent. And like we mentioned, we shall be evoking these two key points that are the heart of Africa's conversation, especially at a time when we have numerous cultures on the African continent. But above all, it is one people. And of course, that's why we are discussing this on today's edition of Talking Points. To kickstart or open our panel this day, we've been joined by Chief MUSI in his capacity as a traditional authority in Cameroon, as well as a Pan-Africanist. You're welcome, Your Majesty.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you for having me on the show. It's always my pleasure being on For You Media and talking about Pan-Africanism and putting Africa at the front line. Always my pleasure and glad to be here.
It's always a pleasure to have you on board. Meanwhile, we equally been joined by Dr. Stanley FONGOD in his capacity as a Pan-Africanist and an economist. You're welcome on board, sir.
Thank you, Sharon, for having me, and thank Chief also for joining. And I hope that today we will have a very fruitful conversation.
Exactly. Just to reiterate that, on course, the program we might be joined by OBERT DUBE, who shall be joining us in his capacity as a poet and a Pan-Africanist all the way from Zimbabwe. Now, to dive into today's conversation, I'll kickstart with you, Your Majesty. Now, in a bit to understand, it's often said on the African continent that before we start talking about Pan-Africanism, we need to understand first our roots, our culture, because this is in one way or the other the part to having a united or a more solidarized African continent. Now, to debut the conversation with you today, how in the past centuries, the African continent, how has Africa's cultural diversity, historically influenced regional unity within the context of the African continent?
First, I would start this conversation of today by saying that civilization started in Africa. And if civilization started in Africa, it's important for us to highlight some key points that we existed before the coming of Christ, BC, and before the coming of Christ, Africa had existed. And if we existed as Africans, we had some particular values that we held up to. We had some cultural beliefs. We had a way of worshiping. We had a way of believing in our people. We had a way of managing our own people. And we actually had a way of going about our own things as Africans. The conversation today is key, not only key to the fact that we as African, we are a race, we are a people, we are a subject, we are a kind of an identity. And being part of this conversation today is very key to me because as a traditional ruler and a custodian of culture, of a people, I find it relatively very important for me to be on this show today and to talk about our African culture and to leverage on how we can ignite regional unity. Let me highlight the fact that because we existed before the coming of Christ, it is important for us to understand that as Africans, there are certain beliefs that we grew up to inherit from our forefathers. And because we grew up to inherit these beliefs, these customs and cultures, our people had a way of paying allegiance to these cultural beliefs. And today, we are only sitting in as heir to those thrones. And because we are heir to a throne, it is important for us to keep that identity and what our people believe in. This is very sensitive for someone like me as a traditional ruler to be talking about those beliefs, because I know and I hold a very strong conviction there is a lot about our culture that has to be put in place, that has to be protected for us to be able to remain the true Africans that we are. I'm sure in the course of the show, this program of today, we are going to be unveiling some of those things that make us believe that we are Africans, and that make us believe that we have a culture, and that makes us believe that our people believe in those cultures, and they hold it very strong as a tool of development. Yes, Africa as one has these cultures, and this cultural belief stands very strong. And if you want to go back into the books to read how colonization came about, you understand that they used most of our rulers, in quotes, I say traditional rulers, to be able to assimilate our people. So this is quite sensitive to me, and I think as we run on, as we go on this show, I'm going to be talking a lot, but let's have this strong in mind that Africans are a people that have a belief. Africans are a people that have that protect that valuable culture of theirs that have to stay and stay for posterity, for Africans to be unique.
Exactly, and of course this culture is what makes the African people unique. And moving forward with you, Dr. FONGOD, have a listen to your co-panelist, Chief MUSI. From your perspective, it's often said when you take a notice across what's happening across the African continent, or take note, you will realize that we have several countries on the African continent. Take for instance the eastern part of the continent. They may have cultures that are quite similar in nature. But then moving forward, can this cultural identity transcend national borders to ensure that we have some sense of regional belonging?
Absolutely, and I think that it is very important for us to fully understand that while we talk about culture, it is important to note that actually culture will predict for intelligence, and that will eventually predict success, especially when it comes to a particular nation or a particular society. So we have to be able to make sure that we get what we have and also practice what we have. The problem on the African continent is that now we have a buffet of cultures, not just because we have many cultures on the African continent, which is a testament to the many languages that we speak, because language is actually a vehicle for culture. But the reason is primarily because we have a huge problem on the continent of Africa, which is Eurocentric Christianity. So, and that also goes for Islam. Let me basically define both. Number one, if you look at Islam, you realize that Islam basically started around the 7th century, and came from Medina. It came from the Middle East. It came from the Saudi Arabia area. And if you look at Muslims today, they are a replica of the cultures of the people from where the religion spread. It has nothing at all to do with us as Africans. Same with Christianity. So if you look at Christianity, almost every single thing else in Christianity, including the celebrations that we carry in Christianity, are a reflection of Eurocentric Eurocentric values and cultures and customs and traditions from Europe. For example, why do people suddenly wear white clothes and women wear white clothes and go to church for some wedding? The reason is because it is cultural, and just something started around the 14th, 15th century, you know, by Queen Victoria of England, and because she wore a white dress, it became tradition in Europe for people to wear white dresses, you know, and go to get married, and that has nothing to do with Christianity for that matter. And so everyone on the African continent now basically conducts that all around the world in antithesis to our own cultures, our own values, and our own belief systems. So there is a great buffet of things, just means many different influences of culture on the continent of Africa. And I think that it will be extremely quite important for us to laser in and basically use more of a scalpel and try to, as much as we can, to carve out those areas, you know, within our cultural structures that is uniquely African, and try as much as we can to be able, you know, to dismantle those that are not uniquely African. Culture is moving, culture is changing, we get that, but we cannot allow culture to change at the point to which it becomes a detriment to who we are as a people. There is this unique identity which we have, and we must be able to do whatever it takes to maintain those identity. And if you look across the different cultures, especially in the zones, those unique differences that we have in who we are predicts the way we have intelligence, and our intelligence also will matter a lot, especially because we will, some people become a little bit more analytical. Some folks can look at a particular problem from a different perspective based upon their cultural upbringing, which is quite good, especially when you're trying to solve complex problems and you have many people from many backgrounds sitting down together and looking at the same problem. They don't have the same vantage point, but the reality is that the solutions that they bring, since it is a combination of different ideas, always becomes quite solid. Many corporations, you know, within the United States and Europe understands that, and they make good, you know, on those. So we have to be able to make sure that we celebrate our cultural diversity, you know, on the continent of Africa, because the beauty of who we are as a people is this mosaic view. When you look at the continent from a vantage point that allows you to see its uniqueness from many multicultural, you know, and ethnic backgrounds, and to see the beauty of the people and their customs and their traditions and their values and their norms. That in itself is truly beautiful. I think that we must be able to find some kind of regional, you know, integration and sustainability within those framework, and make sure that we absolutely enjoy, you know, the diversity that we have so far as our culture is concerned. And with that, I think that what Chief MUSI said is absolutely brilliant.
Exactly, and of course, it's worth noting you reiterated that we as Africans can use this cultural heritage, you know, to transcend borders and of course foster unity on the African continent. Back to you, Chief MUSI. Haven't heard your co-panelist and his point he was defending so far. In your perspective, looking at Cameroon, for instance, it's often said charity begins at home. Cameroon has numerous ethnic groups. But we should not, you know, ignore the fact that in as much as there are different ethnic groups, those groups might have shared languages or languages that might have similar words in such a way that someone from the Douala or the central region can be able to relate with someone from another part of the country. Now, looking at the African continents and the different languages we have in Africa, how can these shared languages, you know, the shared tradition, the shared arts that do exist on this continent, you know, be used to foster stronger regional ties within the African continent?
Yeah, Sharon, I want to first thank Dr. FONGOD for his very brilliant contribution on this topic, because he only emphasizes on the fact that Africa is a more united continent. And yeah, we have plus 3,000 ethnic groups across Africa. Okay. And Cameroon has plus 250 ethnic groups. And amongst these 3,000 across Africa, we're looking at groups like, we have groupings like the South African grouping. And if you look at the beliefs and how the South Africans look at unity across Africa, because if we are talking about this cooperation, if we are talking about this culture, if we are talking about these ideologies, we are looking about what Africans as a people, what Africa as a continent thinks about. And I want to emphasize more on what is across the African continent. Let's take a simple example like South Africa. South Africa talks about the Ubuntu spirit. The Ubuntu spirit in South Africa, which is I am because we are. Like, it's me because we are South Africans. So that's the Ubuntu spirit. And if you look across these plus 3,000 ethnic groups across Africa, we'll be looking at different different regions of Africa and what their beliefs are. And take a little swap at the East African belief. Like the Ubuntu in South Africa, the East Africans believe in the what we call the Harambee. The Harambee, which means pulling together. It means pulling together. And if the East Africans, like the South Africans, are looking at Ubuntu, which is I am because we are, and the Harambee are talking in East Africa about pulling together, you get to regions like East Africa. Some of the countries in East Africa, they talk about the Jamari. The Jamari, which is kind of, they put familyhood and cooperative economy as an instrument of them being together. So if you keep looking at all of these different attributes across Africa, it makes you to have that belief that Africans have a spirit of not just unity, they have a spirit of cooperation. And of course, you would go to the Yorubas, because we can't talk in Africa without going to the Muslim communities, to the Fulani communities. And if you go to Nigeria, you have the Yorubas in West Africa, which they call them the Amulabi. The Amulabi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it well. I'm sorry if I haven't gotten the pronunciation well, but the people of West Africa, especially the Yoruba people, they talk of what they call the Mulaibi. The Mulaibi, they say Mulaibi in their own belief are a people of integrity. They are people of integrity that cuts right across to Burkina Faso. If they are a people of integrity, we are talking about the true Africans, because this now brings us to Africa as a community. This brings us to Africa as a corporation. This brings us to Africa as a people that have mutual respect for each and everyone, which we call a brother or a sister's keeper. And I think on these self-values, we are talking about a continental foundation that we are building. I am looking at the people of my own tribe, because you can't make an analogy without looking at the people from your own background. If you come to my own community, like Pinyin, which is in northwest region of Cameroon, and precisely in certain subdivision, we believe in what we call Metop, what we call Azamu. Metop are a people that are interconnected, are a people that believe in the attributes of giving, are a people that believe in the attributes of being together. Azamu, in my own tribe, which is our main strength and power, the red and the blue, the red and the white, are a people that believe in certain values that goes with numbers. So in my local tribe, in Pinyin, where I am from, we have this conviction that the more the numbers, the more the interrelation, and the more the strength, and the more the values. And these are very pertinent aspects of a democratic society. So I'm trying to say that we have only, within the past centuries, tried to reconvert in literary terms what the Western man or the learned persons, they call learning from simple alphabets. And if we are learning from simple alphabets, we never ever do our counts without using the numbers 1 to 9 and to 0. And we never ever use any letter above the 26 letters of the alphabet. So my belief and conviction is that even in the era of modernity, Africans have always remained that strong value in terms of their numbers, in terms of their beliefs, in terms of their ideologies, and in terms of their cultural values.
Thank you immensely, Chief MUSI. That was a very brilliant insight and very detailed as far as Africa. And we should note that Africa is fast growing. And indeed, that leads me now to the next question with you, Dr. FONGOD. Have a listen to this detailed response from your co-panelist, Chief MUSI. In your perspective, how can you add up to the fact that though we have these existing cultural initiatives across the African continent, one that we have mentioned in the course of this show since we debuted, that at every level much more progress needs to be made, but Africans need to come to a realization that they have a role to foster their own, their own development through enhancing their cultural values for shared unity. With that said, how can Africa enhance the already existing policies, initiatives that do exist as far as, the cultural sector is concerned, so that it goes a long way in harnessing unity on the African continent?
When we talk about, the cultural sector, I think that we have to be a little bit careful, especially when we talk about reforms within that sector. Reasons being that those who are pushing, for reforms in this sector are by themselves. They too need reforms. And the reason for that is because they have this false premise on operating on the basis that states that this is who we are as a people, and we're trying to be able to maintain this cultural heritage. And so we will do certain things to be able to enhance it. The problem is there is this constant barrage, which they too are victims of, that it's as constant, on the African continent. And because it is so old, we have the tendency to think that that is who we are as a people. The reality is that it's not us as a people. If you look at culture, there's one specific part of culture that has to absolutely be holding high regards, and that's music. I've forgotten the philosopher who says it. I don't know, it's Bertrand Russell, who basically, I don't know, maybe not, but who basically stated that he doesn't care who runs the nation. He doesn't care exactly, who, is in leadership. What he cares about is he who writes the music. And the reason for that is because if you can change the music, if you can be able to tweak the philosophy, then you'll have the tendency to be able to change culture. And that is primarily what is happening with us so far as, just music is concerned. If you look at music, there is this Western influence on music, on our own cultural heritage, on the music that we have on the continent of Africa. And so while we are talking about being able to change, and maintain our cultures, we have to be able to understand where we've gone wrong, and some of the influences that we've had, which is absolutely not even African at all. If you walked over into any church today, you will see people playing the organ. You will see folks playing the piano. That whole entire music, organ and drum set with guitar is Eurocentric. It has absolutely nothing to do with Christianity at all. If you look at the first century Christianity, those guys in the Middle East, which basically left the Middle East, and then when Christianity got to Europe, there was this huge transformation of Christianity. And what the African got, especially within the colonial era and before that, within slavery, what the African got was a European version of Christianity. It was not Christianity at all. That being said, most of the things we practice in churches, for example, you hear somebody singing hymns, all of those things, they are quite European in nature. There's no way you will find that within the first century context, within the days of Jesus, and after that when the apostles, started spreading the gospel. And so there is this false narrative that the moment you start talking about something as blatant as that, you're somewhat anti-Christ, or you're somebody who does not believe in Christ, and the African will basically basically schooled you, you know, as to state how uneducated you are and how you're going to hell. But the reality is that the only person who basically does not understand the history is the person who is defending something they know absolutely nothing about. If you look at first century Christianity, and if you look at where we are today, there is a huge, gigantic influence. And from all I know is this: if Christianity has to be as standard as it is, which basically means is the claim of the Christian text that it is unchanging, that we have this God that is unchanging. But then the moment you look at Christianity from when Christ came to where we are today, there have been variations of changes, to which it is that there are songs that we sing in church which has nothing at all, written by men who basically were not even Christians. I'm talking about people who wrote secular music and then wrote something, that sounded quite religious, and then the whole entire church adopted that, and that goes for our buildings, the whole entire Roman Catholic Church. You can't even be a Roman Catholic priest if you do not speak Latin, and that Latin is none of the languages that Christ himself spoke. If there was going to be anything like that, that is all European influence. So why don't we celebrate who we are as a people so far as our cultures and our music are concerned? Because music, believe me, music has a lot to do with who we are as a people. What basically moves you and allow you to basically tap your feet and think about a whole lot of things. What you do is that you are doing all of that within the filters of a particular culture. And the moment you lose that unique ability to understand that you're being shifted from your own cultural heritage and you're being placed in a foreign place that you do not even belong, that in itself, goes against what we are trying to be able to preserve. I think that if an African really needs to be able to tap their feet, it should be something that chants to the echoes of the undulating hills we have on the continent of Africa. It should be something that chants to who we are as a people. And frankly speaking, that's what makes culture culture.
Indeed, that's what makes culture culture. Back to you, Your Majesty. You said something at the beginning that drew my attention. You said civilization began on the African continent. Well, as it stands on the African continent as of now, we still have countries that feel they are more European or are not supposed to be on the African continent, whereas we are fighting for a continent that can, showcases Africanness, if I can use the word. But now, looking at what Africa stands to gain at this point, I think Africa, with the evolution of Pan-Africanism in recent years, we're seeing a change in mindset. We're seeing a change in narrative on the African continent, with Africans that are striving for their own true liberation, points we have noted on several occasions in the course of this program. So, from your perspective as a traditional authority, how do the colonial era bodies that existed or still exist on the African continent continue to shape divisions, within the continent, despite the shared cultural heritage that still exists?
Well, I think there is something that I want to highlight. In as much as I did mention earlier that we have plus 3,000 languages that we speak, or ethnic groups across Africa. We must also highlight the fact that these 3,000 plus ethnic groups have 3,000 plus cultural beliefs.
True.
But let me capitalize on the fact that these cultural beliefs are manifested by the descendants of our forefathers. If you come to my tribe, you'll hear we migrated from Widikum. You also hear that the Widikum people migrated from the Tikaris. They migrated from northern Nigeria. They migrated from different parts of Africa. These are a people. And let's keep in mind that the division that has existed between amongst Africans, which is a division that we accept as Africans, but we still hold strong to our cultural values, is the fact that because we are descendants of a particular background, we are descendants of a race, we're descendants of a people, we still have that conviction and believe that in as much as our forefathers still remains Africans with a black-colored skin, we have a culture and a belief. And most of these people who migrated and formed their own different ethnic groups their own different clans, their own different villages, their own different cultures, and talk of their own different languages, are people who move from a particular background. And because they moved, it was because of succession right, leadership possibilities, leadership opportunities. Most of these people migrated because they were not given an opportunity to lead. And that's why you find across Africa, sorry to say, most of the problems that arise across Africa are always associated to leadership issues, because people want to be in leadership position. People want to be commanders. And this has always been the bedrock of Africans. They want to be in leadership position. So when we migrated because our forefathers' inheritance was the subject of our own concern, where when a father dies, with the so many children that they had to look for one of the children and bestow the powers to that child to be the heir to the throne. And because we believe that whoever was in the leadership position had control over the monarch, it became an issue where other children who were from that same bloodline wanted to be in leadership. But today, across Africa, during a migration era, most of these people moved. Most of these children who were not given the right to be heir to their parents' throne moved and formed their own villages. But this did not change the fact that we remain Africans. So the blood that flows in us still remains, our ideologies still remains, our cultural beliefs still remain. So, in effect, what I'm saying is acknowledging the fact that we had these challenges across Africa that made us who we are and what we are today, but we should not forget that these values have made us to be able to believe in one another. And these beliefs have cut across what we today practice across Africa, which is something like we have cultural manifestations. These cultural manifestations are a replica of who we are as Africans. I'll take a simple example like the festivals, cultural festivals across Africa. When you go to most of the cultural festivals, let's take film and cinema, which is a domain where I'm very versed with as a filmmaker, because not only am I a cultural, a traditional leader, I am a trained filmmaker by profession and a photojournalist. So if we take filmmaking, which is a domain where I've exploited a lot, I've been a juror on more than 15 film festivals across Africa, I understand perfectly well where we are coming from. And from the films that we show across Africa, it depicts most of our cultural values, most of our cultural identities. So having watched most of these films across Africa for the past 20 years as a juror on most of these festivals, I have that strong conviction that Africans have one belief. And because we move across these different festivals in Africa, we keep inculcating and assimilating in our people the belief that we, Africa, remain a particular people. So I think that those are some of the things I want to highlight. But again, if you look at what happened within the African Union, they recently adopted Swahili as the lingua franca of Africans. So I think Swahili, being the lingua franca, is a little bit drift from the normal English and French, which our colonial masters brought into Africa. So yes, we are a people, we have a belief, and we stay whole to our cultural identity as Africans.
Indeed, numerous challenges will come, but it's all about Africa, going through all those challenges to ensure that they stay strong and united as one people. Thank you so much, Your Majesty. Meanwhile, Dr. FONGOD, we acknowledge the fact that Africa is reeling from a plethora of challenges, from security to climate change to political tensions, turmoils on the African continent and beyond. But then, looking at the context in which Africa finds itself, in what ways can these cultural differences on the African continent, go a long way in fostering more unity rather than discord within Africa?
Well, I think I said earlier on that culture actually predicts for intelligence, and the reality is that it actually helps, different groups have, different analytical skills that is actually useful in problem solving. So I think that with many multicultural frameworks that we have, with the many cultures that we have on the continent of Africa, it's actually a plus, not a minus. So it's going to be able to help us if we are given the opportunity as Africans to explore and solve different problems on the continent of Africa. I think that is actually going to be a plus. First of all, the question becomes, is there any template to which it is that the African can actually emerge out of? Absolutely. If we look at the Kemetic civilization, Chief basically stated that earlier on about civilization beginning in Africa. If you look at the Kemetic civilization, which is basically the Egyptian civilization, okay, of all the dynasties, which I think the 18th to the 25th dynasty will be my best dynasty out of Egypt, the reality is that we basically dominated the world in almost every aspect of life, all right, in technology, in engineering, in medicine, all right. The African or the Kemites were the people, the land of the blacks as is known, in which that's the meaning of Kemet. They were known across the world as, the people who had everything. Engineering. If you look at some of the engineering marvel, which is basically the pyramids of Giza, what you'll be seeing is a fit that today there are all forms of conversations in academic communities just trying to be able to find out how that building was constructed. And by the way, they were not constructed by Arabs. They were not constructed, by the present version of Egyptians that you have today, because that came as a result of an influx of Turks, people who came from Turkey that invaded that particular part of Africa. And so they were constructed by men that looked like you and I. And if you basically look across the continent, you will see, it's actually have spots across the continent of Africa where we had great civilization, okay, which basically spoke of great intelligence. I think that the first time Europeans, especially the Greeks, when they saw the sculptures that were being created in Benin in Nigeria, they basically said to themselves, this must have been, the lost cultures of the Atlantis. And the reason for that is because the methods that those guys were using in Benin to create those, great sculptures, they were not using those techniques in Europe at that time. That's to tell you how advanced, Africa has been in every space, in medicine and in everything you can think about. I think that Africans were dominating. And so it brings us to a place where we really have to start thinking about who we are as a people, especially when we are trying to be able to build the next generation and tell the next generation about the capacities that they carry and who they are. The reality is this: if we do not appreciate our culture, and the only way for us to appreciate our culture is to go back. We cannot appreciate our culture by being in the present. I think that our culture is nothing else but elements of our past. And so if we're able to celebrate our past, then it's going to help each and every one of us to be able, to build up a robust curriculum in our academic institutions that will allow us to be able to talk about great philosophers, great inventors, and people who built great things on the continent of Africa, so that we can be able to not only be talking about Western civilization, and which basically begins primarily from Greece, but it's important for you to understand that Greco-Roman civilization will not be possible without the influence of the Kemetic civilization. As a matter of fact, even going further to say that if you look at Europe, it was actually built with a lot of influence from the Moors in North Africa, especially in Morocco. So there is really nothing special about Western civilization, if not the Greco-Roman civilization, and there's nothing special about Greco-Roman civilization, if not about the Kemetic civilization, if not about the civilization that came out of Egypt. Most of Greek philosophers, actually men like Plato, had most of their conversations, in Africa. If you look at something like Pythagoras, the Pythagoras theorem, or pi for that matter, which is 3.14, the pi calculation 3.14 was known in Kemet 4,000 years, almost 2,000 years before Pythagoras came with that, which was known in Kemet to be 3.16. And so I think that there is a lot to be said about engineering, ingenuity that the African has. And if we can just look back as who we are are as Africans, then there is need for us to celebrate us, not looking at the West and thinking that the West is everything. Believe me, the West literally emerged out of Africa. So I think that Africans, for that matter, we are not a byproduct of human civilization, but we are actually the forerunners of human civilization.
Now, Dr. FONGOD, I really appreciate you for your response, but then I have a question for Chief MUSI. This question is very pertinent because it comes at this very context in which Africa finds itself in a global era. Now, Chief MUSI, numerous pundits on the African continent share the opinion that, you know, Africa's values, Africa's culture is under threat, you know, from globalization, from technology, and you can name the rest. So being a traditional authority on the African continent, how can Africans ensure that our African values don't get extinct, you know, in the wake of all this technological advancements that are coming to the African continent? And moreover, how can Africa use these, you know, for their own enhancement to foster unity in the African continent?
Well, NJIX, we can't look at all of this without first seeing that we have certain challenges that make us to believe in this global hindrances.
True.
First, the challenges that we have as Africans is the fact that we have this tribalism and ethnic division. We have tribalism and ethnic division because if you look across Africa, you would see that, like I mentioned earlier, there are lots of tribes across Africa, and globalization has come in its own identity to divide Africans. And coming to divide Africans is because of the strength that the colonizers saw in us as Africans, and how the Western society wanted to interpret what we do as Africans. And if we see this as a challenge, it is but imperative that we start looking at how to curb and to change this narrative. And we have to change this narrative as Africans. It starts from the younger generation, because this narrative cannot be changed without having a strong, a powerful, and a united youth generation that can uphold to some of the values that we believe as Africans. And like I said earlier, I didn't mention that the African Union adopted Swahili as an official language.
True.
This is a step toward making us Africans, especially the younger generation, the youths, to understand that despite the globalization and westernization of our African values, of our African cultures, there is still need for us to believe in what we are as Africans and to hold strong to our traditional beliefs. And if these aspects are looked into well and purposefully, we will be looking at aspects of us not misrepresenting our African cultures. Like, we have all this whole belief across Africa where we have stereotypes. Stereotypes where the Africans came in with Christianity, they made our people to believe in Christianity, and these stereotypes have affected our people to a level where they only believe that without the existence of God Almighty, Africa will not exist, or we will not exist as human beings. But we fail to understand that God created heavens and earth, and because He created heaven and earth, He made us to live in this earth as His chosen people, and gave us laws that we lived by these laws. And I think Christianity only came to solidify those beliefs that we had as Africans, that we poured libations, we worshipped idols, we worshipped our gods. They call it idols in Christian jargons, but we call it our own gods because these are the gods of Africa. These are the beliefs, our ancestors. And I think if we have to move away from these stereotype conceptions, we are definitely going to move into this theoretic, this ethnic narrative, where we will all believe as Africans that we have a strong value that we all have to uphold. I'm a little bit saddened by the fact that maybe to a certain extent, some of our African traditional rulers, like you said, how do we curb down on all of this? Most of us, our African traditional rulers, have taken the side of politics. And because they have taken the side of politics, which is the white man's principles of disunity, divide and rule, it it affects us as people of a continent, as people of a background, and as people of a traditional belief. It influences us on how we have to think, we have to see, we have to speak, and we have to narrate. So I think it is important for our leaders, but political leaders who are part of our tradition, to deviate a little bit from these misconceptions and be able to uphold those values that we have as Africans.
Well, I'll be staying with you, Chief MUSI, because your point actually leads me to the next. In your previous response, you cited that it's imperative for Africans to be able to utilize educational systems, educational institutions. You mentioned equally the use of the media as well as in creating films to pass across the values of African people. Now, before I get back to Dr. FONGOD to, get the aspect of technology, I'd like you to, edify our audience on how educational systems, do you believe that revamping the educational system on the African continent could go a long way in enhancing, the use of culture in fostering regional unity?
Let me just cut it very short. I'm talking about my own household. Take my little boy. Take my little boy who is going to nursery and who is learning English language, who is learning the white man's language. When I come back home each evening and I want to play with my little boy, I start by saying, they teach them in Western society, they say hands up, hands down, hands up, hands down. It's simple in your local parlance to tell your child, and you try as much as possible to let these children grow in their own beliefs, to grow in their own cultures. And I think it is important for us to emphasize that we need to not only in studying the Western colonized system of education, educate and empower our children to be able to learn our mother tongue, to be able to learn our cultures, to be able to learn what we believed in before believing in what we believe today, so that in the course of growing up we pass over generational concepts and beliefs to our own children so that they can uphold it to a way and to a level where no one can be able to deter us. I want to deter them. I want to look at a simple example. There are our traditional beliefs that still hold. We pour libations to our forefathers to ask for blessings of the land. When we are having planting, we go back to our cultures. We still go around the village. We do planting libations to make crops to blossom during the rainy seasons or during the planting seasons. These are beliefs that we as Africans have never abandoned. Even in a situation in the crisis-torn regions of the Northwest and Southwest, our cultures in Cameroon still upholds where the traditional rulers still believe in what culture is and what it is for them to appease the land and appease the gods for posterity, for serenity, and for perfect cohabitation with both neighbors, strangers, and people of the same people of their villages. So I think what you're saying is the fact that we need to emphasize that we teach our culture to our children and be sure that we are transcending this culture so that generations upon generations uphold these cultural values across Africa, and we make Africa a place where no one will ever want to turn his or her back against being here, but he or she who is an African residing out of the continent would want to come back to Africa to add more values to our belief, to our conceptions, to our development. We can see across Africa that most of the technological development, the IQ and the belief of our young stars are making Africa grow, and there's a lot of development, there's a lot of invention in terms of mechanical inventions, architectural investments, and all of that across Africa, and we are able to sustain Africa. Of course, we have the raw materials, so why don't we believe in Africa and make Africa great again?
Indeed, Africa is a great continent, like you mentioned, Your Majesty. Back to you, Dr. FONGOD. I said I was going to come back to you as far as, how Africa can leverage technology in advancing, and enhancing our culture on the African continent so we can enhance our regional unity. So, being a tech expert, what do you have to say as far as that is concerned?
I think that there's a lot that we can do so far as technology is concerned. There is a lot of platforms that we can be able to build, some of which are already existing that we can basically just modify to fit the African. And this will basically also means that we have high penetration of internet connectivity so that we can get young people connected to these e-learning platforms where we can be able to start learning or teaching them who we are as a people and teaching them very complex systems in mathematics, and in mathematics and medicine that is actually of African origin. For example, if you look in southwestern Nigeria, if you look at the Yoruba people, if you look at the Benin people and the Togo, the people from Togo, they have these unique numbering systems, which is very unique. Okay, so normally traditionally in the world we have the decimal system, which basically starts from 1 to 10, but the Yoruba mathematics is system or their numbering systems actually starts from 1 to 20. And the reality is that solving a problem with a 20-base system is absolutely very complex. Ask any mathematician, they will tell you just how complex it is. And if you can believe for 1 second that you have a little tribe, okay, on the continent of Africa that spans across 3 nations in the western part of Nigeria, the Yoruba people, those from Benin, the country of Benin, and also the country of Togo, and they're using a 20-base system, not a 10-base system, that tells you a little bit about Africa's ingenuity. It tells you a little bit about where we are as a people. And if you look across the continent, you will see great examples of stuff like that, which basically challenges not just the medical community, but the scientific community, for that matter, across the world. So we have a lot that we can be able to teach, and I think that instituting platforms where we can be able to harness a lot of this skill set is extremely very important. The only thing I ask for is this: let there be internet connectivity, and may we have power. 2 things. Without power, internet connectivity is as useless as anything else, and so with power and internet connectivity, I think that we will be on the right trajectory to be able to get a lot of young people on the continent of Africa educated in the right stuff and allow our own cultures to flourish. The reality is this: I'm a Christian, fine. I absolutely subscribe to the Judeo-Christian worldview, fine. But I am in no way going to be able to allow, Eurocentric values to be able to interfere with my own cultural values. The same thing that Europeans took the scriptures and did with the scriptures is the same thing I need to take the scriptures within the 1st century context and do to it the same way Europe did to it, and do to it in context of who I am as an African. I don't think that any culture is inferior to another culture. And the reality is that we need to get young people on the continent of Africa to be excited about African culture. Okay. There is this thing where when you talk about culture, or when you speak the language, when you speak your traditional language, people look at you and they go, wow, you do? Because it's not in vogue. It is not something that you should say because it makes you look a little bit local. But there is something unique about your ability to think in multiple languages. And the fact that you are able to even speak your traditional language is the testament, to the brilliance of your mind. It is absolutely, not a downside. It is an upside to who you are as a person. So if we encourage Africans and we tell Africa's story from an Afrocentric perspective to get young Africans to understand just how powerful the continent has been, that they are the sons of men like Mansa Musa, Hans Zenga of Angola, that they are the sons of men like Hannibal of Carthage, that they absolutely came from great cultural heritage like that of Kemet, of the Makambubwe in South Africa, of the great Zimbabwe. I tell you the honest truth, no African will sit on the sideline and look at themselves to become poor or look at themselves to become uneducated, uninformed. The only problem with the African is that the African is looking at Africa from the lens of Europe. The African is not looking at Africa from the lens of Africa. We have to basically look at Africa from an Afrocentric perspective, not a Eurocentric perspective. When I see my brother, when I see Chief, I see an African. When I see you, a host, I see an African. I am not looking at you in any other lens. I'm looking at you for who you are as an African. You are my brother, and I expect to see a reflection of me in you. I'm not going to look at somebody else from outside of the continent to find meaning. If I have to find meaning as an African, it has to be you. So in reality, the notion of Ubuntu cannot basically flourish outside of the framework of who you are as a person. And I think that until we appreciate Africa and appreciate our ancestors, the reality is this: we'll always be a bystander on the world making progress to great heights. Reasons being, we have nothing to hold on to. My ancestors mean everything.
It's true. I was thinking with you, Dr. FONGOD, it's true we are way past the days where we used to sit around fireplaces and listen to tales about how to, you know, the stories that made us African. You know, what's often said, it takes a community to raise a child on the African continent. But then, you mentioned how Africans can leverage, you know, technology to advance, you know, African values on the African continent, and of course, scrap off these issues of non-unity on the African continent. But then, away from that, what other platforms could be used to bridge the cultural divide that already exists on the African continent?
There are many things that we can be able to build, especially as we try to inform young people on the cultures on the continent. We have values, we have systems, we have norms, we have our own cultural heritage. There are things that is quite unique to us. There are things that are unique to me from Bali. There are things that are unique to the chief from, God help me, from his palace out there in Pinyin. There are things, you know, that are unique to each and every one of us. The reality is this: if we just basically start by saying that we're going to build up little tiny cartoon shows that basically run in our own traditional languages, enforcing certain cultural values, not something that is quite Eurocentric. I want my kid to be able to understand our story from us in Africa. Let us basically share our own folklores. I think that there are unique stories that that they told us or we learned as kids growing up. We need to be able to digitalize stories, create cartoons with those stories, and allow young Africans to be able to be embellished, within those stories, so that we can be able to find meaning, or they can find meaning as they grow up, so that certain values, structures within our culture, should not be lost. Why should someone like Chief Son, be studying cartoons that are based here in the United States or in Europe, all right, or watching something that is being transmitted on television in French? I'd rather that child basically learn something that is cultural to us as a people, that will reinforce in the child the values that we have, and will make that child fully understand the capacities we carry as a people and the reason why those values are needed. That is the only way in which we push this forward. We need to create these platforms. Nobody is going to create it for us, and it's as simple as that. When we build, there's so many things that we do on a daily basis. When you flip on your television screen, somebody is speaking to you in a language that you understand, but it's not ethnic to you. It's called French. It's called English. And the reality is this, that we are now lost in translation. Let me say this to you, please. I'll probably end with this. I grew up in Bali, and there is a very there is this greeting in Bali, which when you show up in Bali, somebody asks you, Amo, which means how are you? There is a response to it, which means I'm funny. You can say abong, which is good, but there's an expression which says I'm funny. It's a common known expression, I'm funny. It took me many years to understand just how brilliant the Bali man was in coining that particular phrase. Imagine you walking during the dry season, it's pitch hot. Okay, places are all patched up and burnt up in the grasslands in the northwest region. And you come across this spring and you're able to scoop out some kind of cocoyam leaves, and then you scoop water from the spring and then you drink it. The cooling sensation of that water is what we will say in Mungalka, you will say in Chile, which means the water is cold. It's kind of refreshing, not cold like it's coming from the fridge. You will say in Chile, funny, the same word, I'm funny, which basically means that when you meet someone from my tribe and you ask them, how are you doing? When the person says, I'm funny, it does not mean that everything is well. What he's saying to you is that despite what I might be going through, despite the circumstances that is around me, I choose at this moment in time to be able to affirm to you that everything is all right. And I think that in more ways, across the continent of Africa, there are many languages and many structures in different languages that paints a brilliant picture of who we are as a people.
Indeed, that was very enriching. And of course, I'm believing that our audience is learning one or two things. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Talking Points over For You Media Africa, where we dissect matters pertaining to the African continent and beyond. We should equally reiterate that you're watching us on For You Television, listening to us over the airways of FM 96.3, For You Radio, and we are streaming live on our social media platforms. Now, to continue with you, Chief MUSI, your co-panelist shares the view that Africans, in as much as we have different values, at the end of the day, everything is going to be fine. Now, in a bit to understand how Africans can use indigenous systems on the African continent, from your perspective, not just being a traditional authority, but being a Pan-Africanist, how can these indigenous knowledge systems on the African continent, as well as traditional leadership, go in one way or the other, contribute to enhancing regional unity amongst Africans?
First and foremost, we need to stay to our beliefs. Secondly, we need to let our people trust us as leaders. And if they have to trust us as leader, we need to deviate and disassociate ourselves as traditional rulers, as leaders of our people from politics, because politics is the Western system of governance. We need to deviate, move away from politics. And if that is done, our people will continue to believe in us as our forefathers did hundreds of years ago. And at the end of the day, we will have a value that we hold so strong to. We'll have a cultural belief and an identity. And one other thing I need to emphasize that actually emphasizes on this disunity is our educational systems, our policy support, and our grassroots cultural revival. We need to be able to have educational systems that encourages our children to learn in our own African languages and to learn things about Africa than just learning physics, than just learning children can learn how to be hands-on and be productive. Another aspect would be policy support. What we need to understand as Africans is that we need to have policies, and these policies should be able to protect our subsystems of governance, which is from our traditional councils, from our palaces, and back to the people in the villages that we call our indigenes. And the last but not the least is our grassroots cultural revival. We need to revive our cultural values through our cultural festivals, through our cultural events, and by encouraging our younger generation to be able to embed themselves into African cultural identities. And if all of this is done, I am very confident to tell you, NJIX, that we Africans see this shared heritage that we have, because if we believe in all these ideologies and believe in each other that we are Africans and from the same race and background, this shared heritage will be a strength for us Africans rather than a difference. And if we put this difference in front, it's going to jeopardize us than the true unity that we are fighting and yearning, that it remains our driving force across Africa. I rest my case.
But I would like to stay with you, Chief MUSI, though you've raised your case. Now, given we have countries across the African continent and out of Africa, let's take, for instance, China. China at this point in time, in as much as a very large nation, has built itself on its language. Its language is quite unique. We have other countries, even within the context of the African continent, other countries that are true to their, their mother languages, the languages that makes them unique, that makes them different, that differentiates them from the French, from the English, from the Portuguese, from the Spanish, and you can name the rest on the African continent. Now, I've mentioned on numerous occasions you're a traditional leader, but what lessons can we learn, can we extract from some of these regions of the world that have been true and have successfully used their culture as a tool of integration to implement this on the African continent?
Let's take China, which is a communist society.
True.
China, as a people, they believe in their communalism. They believe in China first. And because they believe in China first, it means that any child who grows up in China from childhood to adolescent, this child needs to know that if there's anything that happens around you as a human, around your businesses, around your family, about your education, it is China first. So I think this is the right time for us as Africans to galvanize our energies, to be able to have our common language and see how this language can be taught in most of our African institutions so that we can build a stronger base to be able to protect ourselves as Africans, so that when the rightful moment comes, we can exert all of this energy and let people see us as Africans. Because so far, so good, we have only been using a pre-profiling of Africa to be able to exert who we are as Africans. So I think this is the right time that we as Africans, we need to create these beliefs in our systems and dissociate ourselves from political leanings to be able to be Africa. Look at China. There's a lot of importation of their raw materials into Cameroon, machines, cables, every other thing that a human system needs. I even saw a shoe. I saw a plastic, we called it rubber shoe yesterday, with one man putting it on, and I looked at the shoe, it's written on it, Bamenda. Imagine that you see a shoe that's written on it, Bamenda, and with all your frustration over the years that we have gone through what we have gone through in Bamenda, you see a shoe that writes Bamenda. So these are economic policies that are being developed by Westerners to be able to cajole Africans to invest in their economies. So in effect, what I'm saying is that from your last question, NJIX, is that we should consult with the Africans and do a win-win policy that will be for the detriment, that will be for the benefit of all of us as Africans and custodians of our African values, customs, and tradition.
Thank you, Mansley. Chief MUSI, just to note that you are joining us in your capacity as a traditional authority and a Pan-Africanist. Thank you, Mansley. Meanwhile, to culminate today's conversation with you, Dr. FONGOD, you listened to your co-panelists. His Majesty, he stated that it's imperative for Africans to embrace policies that will be, convenient for Africans who embrace the African values, and of course encourage Africans to be able to not just invest but have more and more interest in their cultures. And now the question I'll be asking you is, amidst all this, you're an academia as well. We shouldn't go past that. With all this, what should be the way forward for the African continent? And by so doing, how can ordinary Africans, beyond policymakers, academia like yourself, actively contribute to leveraging culture for regional unity on the African continent?
I think we need to be able to learn a lot from China. I think China has a lot to teach us. The Great Wall of China, for example, was built over 2,000 years. It took 2,000 years to complete the Great Wall of China. and it started from the 7th century all the way to the 17th century. We're talking about 9 different dynasties that constructed the Great Wall of China. And the reality is that any monarch that came in any of those dynasties, when they came to power, their main focus was to continue to build what the previous, dynasty had left undone. So there was a forward progression, a forward motion in progress, and it was not a matter of competition for who is best or who is not. The goal and the dignity of the Chinese people in relationship to what they wanted to achieve was far more important than anyone's individual goal. It's my belief, sincerely, that on the African continent, when it comes to us as a people in embracing our own culture, we have to be able to do whatever it takes to make sure that we celebrate gains that are made by people who are not us. We celebrate gains that are made by people who does not look like us in relationship to our own culture, who does not speak the same language with us, as long as it is pushing the Pan-African agenda, as long as it's lifting the community, it's lifting the region up, we have to be able to celebrate it. I don't think that there's any other thing that we can be able to do that will be as meaningful as that. In the academic community, with research has been done in relationship to how great Africa has been in the past. True. We've had significant conversations as to the limitations and the difficulties that Africa has, which has led to the stagnation of Africa's progress and development. True. We understand that there are many things that we can do so far as engineering is concerned, to be able to allow us to be interconnected with the very difficult landscape we have on the continent of Africa, which is very different from almost any other region in the world. Just so you know, if you take the continent of Africa, our coastline in Africa is actually smaller. Even though we are such a super gigantic continent, it's actually smaller than the coastline of Europe. And the reason is because Europe's coastline is quite undulating. It goes in and out, and so when you stretch that out, the total surface or the total length is far more bigger than that you have on the continent of Africa, and that has helped a lot so far as maritime trade is concerned, because if you look at Africa, the development on the continent has been along the coast. Look at all our major cities, they are all coastal cities because of maritime trade. We understand those difficulties, fine. But the reality is this: there's one thing that is us that no one can change. There's one thing that is us that we should not allow anyone to change. And I think that if we can engineer this properly, it will be the beginning of the explosion we need, which will basically build self-pride, self-dignity, and allow us on the continent of Africa to enjoy who we are as a people. And that will be our culture. If we can celebrate our cultures and love our values and basically appreciate our norms as Africans without allowing us to be second-class citizens to anybody else, that will be great. First of all, it's not just that civilization actually began in Africa, is that the human race, the Homo sapien, actually emerged out of East Africa more than 300,000 years ago. So everyone who is around the world is a product of the African. We are not just the originator of human civilization. We actually gave birth to the present version of humans, the Homo sapiens.
Thank you so much, Dr. FONGOD, for that brilliant one. Just to wrap up now, like they say, it's always good to give chances to authorities. Now, Your Majesty, to conclude, what's your take-home message to our audience listening to today's edition of Talking Point?
When Africans see their shared heritage as a strength rather than a difference, true unity will certainly become possible. That's my take-home message.
Wisdom indeed, Chief MUSI. Thank you immensely, Your Majesty, for taking out time to be with us this day on Talking Point.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I always look forward to being on the show. Thank you.
I equally say thank you so much, Dr. Stanley FONGOD, for your brilliant insight on today's edition of the program.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for inviting me, and thanks, Chief, also for graciously sharing the platform with me.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, it's on this note that we shall be drawing down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Point of your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and of course, do have a great day in company of our numerous programs.